Namaste, welcome everyone. My name is Kassandra, and today I'm going to take you through a pose tutorial on what we call saddle in Yin Yoga, and in Hatha-based traditions, it'll be called Reclined Hero or Supta Virasana. This pose, I'm just going to say it is not appropriate for every body. It truly does depend on your structural alignment and posture. It depends on your pelvis, on your hips, on your low back, and on your knees more specifically. There are some people out there, and I would say a pretty large percentage of the population who, even if they're really careful in the pose and they have all the proper alignment cues and they're really paying attention, it's just never going to feel good and it will hurt and potentially injure their knees. It's one of those that I know a lot of teachers personally who just refuse to teach it because it's not worth the risk. Now, there are other people that I know who can be 20 minutes in this pose and they never even feel a thing. And usually that's just because it is the way their body is made. So I'm giving you this warning right off the bat. It is possible that even with your best intention and best effort, this pose might just not work for you. I'm kind of in between those two poles where I do have to be very careful with how I do this one. It can feel good, but if I'm not really paying attention to my alignment, I can definitely feel it in my knees in a negative way. So reclined hero pose is a big thigh stretch. We're really getting into the hip flexors, getting into the quads. And when we're doing it in the context of a yin yoga practice, if you're familiar with yin, you know that we don't really focus on muscles in yin. We're really mainly concerned with joints and connective tissues. So we would practice saddle pose as a way to strengthen our knees. Now, again, for some people, it's just not going to work no matter how much you try. If it's painful, please don't do it. Leave it out. Okay, I've given like as much disclaimer as I possibly can. So my body personally, I can do it, but I have to be careful. And I like to practice this one with blocks, although some days, if I'm really open, I don't need the props at all. Okay, let me show you how I like to do it and how I was taught to do this pose by one of my teachers, Sienna Sherman. So I like to begin getting the thigh bones, our femurs, parallel to the longer edges of the mat and exactly hip width distance apart. This is important because often when I talk about hip width distance apart, even when we're just standing in mountain pose, for example, and I ask students, place your feet hip width distance apart, people go to the edges of their hips. But I want you to instead think of your bones. So it doesn't matter how wide or how narrow your hips are. I want you to align the top of your hip bone and the top of your knee in that one long line parallel to the edges of your mat. And then from here, you want your feet and your calves on the outer edges of your thighs. And I like to almost roll the flesh of my calves out before I sit down. Some of you already, you're going to be here and it's going to feel so painful in your knees. If that's the case, you could see if the pressure is alleviated by lifting your hips up. So just Virasana or hero pose, sitting, this might be great and very comfortable for you. So this is your first alternative. When I'm looking at my calves and at my feet, what I don't want is for my toes to be rotating out and my ankles to be rotating in. I'm trying to keep everything neutral so that the top of my foot and my toenails are pushing into the floor. So top of the foot firmly planted into the mat. If you were not doing this with a block under your seat because you wanted to do the full saddle or reclined hero or Supta Virasana variation, your next alignment cue would be to lift your hips up a little bit and tuck your tailbone under. Just from lifting and tucking, I can already start to feel a gentle pull and stretch in my quads, which is what we're looking for. The reason why we do a gentle tuck is that when we're going back, what we don't want is for all of the emphasis of the pose to sink into our low back. This is not a pose meant to compress your lower back. We're trying to elongate this. And if you have the kind of spine that I do, which has a pretty sway back, you need to be extra careful of this. So already for me, just by lifting and tucking under and then setting my hips back down, I'm feeling it all through the front of my thighs. I'm starting to feel it a little bit in my knees, but not at all in an uncomfortable or painful way. This might be the extent of saddle pose or reclined hero pose. Now, if you'd like to go a little bit further, you can start to lower down. As soon as you start to lower down, I want you to notice what your knees do. I often see this in students. The knees start to widen the lower down you go. So as much as possible, we're trying to keep that hip width stance. And another thing that tends to happen is that the shins and the knees lift off the floor. This is very dangerous for your knees. I want you to try to keep lengthening them forward and almost grounding them into the floor. And then if you were lengthening and leaning back, for some people, just staying on the palms can be great. And really, the more you can think of pushing down into the tailbone and lengthening out of your lower back, the deeper you're going to feel this into the tops of your thighs. And then the blocks or a bolster can be really helpful as if you were doing supported fish, and you can play with the height here, where you can support your upper back as well as the back of your head here. If you were in a yin yoga class, we would hold a pose like this for 3 to 5 minutes, assuming it is appropriate for your body and that there is no pain. So the principles of yin is to find your edge, so not chasing sensation. We are resolving to be still, which means you're not fidgeting, you're relaxing in the pose. And the third principle is to hold the pose, so letting gravity do the work for you for those 3 to 5 minutes. If you're in a hatha or vinyasa power yoga class, you might engage your muscles a little bit and you probably won't be holding the pose for quite as long. So the warning signs to look out for here are absolutely knee pain. If it feels like it's pinching, like it's pulling, or like there's compression, it's not worth it. Please get out of the pose. It might not be suitable for you. Now, if it feels like it's pain in your lower back, it could just be that you've gone too far into the pose and need to work at the pose lifted up a little bit higher and really working on emphasizing the tuck. So there is one more thing you could try to make the pose a little bit more comfortable, and that is to grab a blanket. Don't know why I didn't grab it before. So any kind of blanket folded once or twice, you could place it in between your calves and your thighs underneath your knees, kind of really wedging it there under the knees. This helps to create a little bit more space. And for those of you with knee pain in this pose, it can make a massive difference. Even for me, just having it there, it feels like a really nice release. And it would be the same alignment cues where I'm lifting, tucking, and starting to lean back. Again, trying not to let my shins and knees lift off the floor. I'm pushing them down and finding lots of length right here. So the blanket is one more thing that you could try as a way to modify the pose and make it a little bit more comfortable. It'll feel really good to stretch your legs out in front of you after this one. So I'm probably a broken record saying this, but just please don't do it if it hurts. Not every yoga pose is meant for every single person. This is something I firmly believe in. There are probably 5 to 10 yoga poses that I know I cannot do, and they are not good for me. That doesn't mean that they're not good for other people and that I shouldn't teach them. It just means that I know it is just not right and not suitable for me. And hero pose or Supta Virasana might be one of those poses for you. So no straining, no pushing, no forcing a certain experience on your body. And another thing that I wanted to mention is that for some people, it's not really pain felt in the knees, it's pain they feel in your ankles. Thankfully, this is something that can kind of be improved over time, but if you have a hard time just letting your ankles be pointed out behind you, it's going to be very difficult to hold this pose and find some comfort in it. It just means you might need to work on ankle flexibility a little bit more. So an ankle stretch would be a good one to start incorporating a little bit more. So you could just sit directly on your heels this time so that your shins are directly under your thighs. And you can work just at leaning back. You might already be feeling it from this. And then you can also work at lifting one shin, lifting the other one, or maybe lifting both. And you're definitely going to feel this. A counter stretch would be to also work on your toe squat. So flexion and extension of the ankles, just so you're really working on it. But whenever we're trying to improve things at the connective tissue or at the joint level, it takes a long time. It's a lot easier to make changes physically to your muscles than it is to, your joints and connective tissue. So you do need to be quite patient with this one, but it is possible. So play around with it. Again, if you have any questions about the pose, leave it down below in the comments. I'll try to answer as many as I can. And if there are any pose tutorials that you'd like to see on my channel, again, leave me a request below. I do already have a fairly good selection of pose tutorials. I'll link the playlist in the comments and in the description box if you want to check out the ones that I already have. I hope you find this helpful. Thank you so much for watching. Subscribe to my channel, and I will practice again with you very soon. Namaste.